Namaste, everybody. So we're back, and we're going to continue with our series that we're doing on Tithis and the secrets of Tithis with Astrology. So welcome, Astrology, and Namaste.
Namaste, Dr. Paiji.
Namaste. And today we'll be doing a Saptami Tithi with Astrology. So Astrology, over to you.
Okay, I'll just quickly share my screen. Is it visible?
Yes. Now it's visible. Yes.
So here we are doing Saptami Tithi today. And Saptami and Shashti Tithi actually they have some qualities which will be a little bit similar, as we are going to see. But before I will move to the description of Saptami Tithi, I would just like to honor the goddess Shivaduti firstly. So Shivaduti literally means messenger of Shiva. And this form of the goddess, she is very often considered as actual commander of Shiva's army, or a servant of Shiva, or a messenger of Shiva. So just through her name, we can actually understand a lot about her nature. Om Aim Hrim Shrim Hrim Shivaduti Namaha. And I would just like to offer one more prayer to her from Lalita Sahasranama. Bhakta Harda Tamo Bheda Bhanumad Bhanusantati Shivaduti Shivaradhya Shivamurti Shivankari. Praised be Goddess Shivaduti, the messenger of Shiva, and the one who is Shiva's very form. She is worshipped by Shiva and she dispenses happiness. She dispels the darkness of ignorance in the minds of her devotees, like the sun's rays dispel the darkness of the world. And that's actually a very, very beautiful shloka, which says a lot about her nature already. And this is something that I also wanted to bring to attention to everybody who is watching these videos, because some of these goddesses, not all of them, but actually very, very big amount of them, is mentioned in Lalita Sahasranama as well. So you can find also shlokas and prayers to them there, and you can also worship them in that way. And I love this shloka very much. It's not because it has very beautiful meaning, but it's very interesting that Goddess Shivaduti is here actually really compared to the rays of the sun. Because even though it is a Tithi which is governed by Saturn, actually it is the birth Tithi of the sun. So sun is born here on the Tithi of Saturn, which is very interesting because usually, we address Saturn as the son of the sun. And here it's kind of like an opposite thing happening, because really Saptami Tithi, so Saturn's lunar day, gives birth to the sun. And it's very beautiful description that she actually dispels the darkness of ignorance, because I believe it tells also a lot about the nature of Shani himself. We usually address Jupiter as this great cosmic teacher, but really Shani is also a great teacher there, even bigger than Jupiter sometimes, because Jupiter gives wisdom, but Shani teaches through experience. Shani is really teaching us through all the life experiences which he's bringing to us. And it's very special. I always kind of laughing about the difference between nature of Jupiter and Shani, because Jupiter firstly will give you wisdom, and then he will test you whether you are able to use this wisdom in reality. And Shani, he will firstly test you, and then afterwards you will get some wisdom. So this is why Shani is more of a strict teacher. And Goddess Shivaduti herself, like her name says, she is like a commander of Shiva's army. And just from this name, we can actually understand that these are people who actually have a very strong and powerful sense of duty and sense of responsibility. People who can be extremely loyal also, like soldiers. These are people who very often are actually engaging themselves in doing seva, selfless service to other people. And they actually, in a way, like those people whom I know personally at least, these are people who really need to do seva in order to feel happy. If they cannot do seva because due to some reason, I don't know, either they have too much work or anything in their life, and it just doesn't allow them to do so much service as they would like to, they just feel very unhappy actually about that. But when they really start to do seva again, I really see like they're almost like blossoming, like they finally feel that, yes, this is who I truly am. And they really need that, they really find themselves fulfilled in that. So it's a very, very also humble Tithi, very patient Tithi as well, and has this powerful sense of responsibility. But due to having this strong sense of responsibility and this strong drive towards fulfilling one's duty, also the natives born on this lunar day, they can actually sacrifice too much for some sort of higher purpose for the sake of the duty. And actually this Tithi, and also Shashti Tithi, the Tithi which we were talking about before, are the two most workaholic Tithis, I would say. These are the Tithis or the lunar days which can be really extremely workaholic sometimes to a very, very high extent. And the Saptami Tithi is slightly different here because Saptami will here sacrifice something for the higher purpose, most likely. It may also sacrifice something due to serving others as well. While Shashti Tithi, most likely it is like more, let's say, proper workaholic, so actually working for the sake of working and gaining money. So it's just a slightly different motivation here. And goddess Shivaduti is also called messenger of Shiva's army. And if we read Lalita Mahatmya, it's also said that she was the one who was actually leading the army of Lalita Tripura Sundari, leading against the dark forces, which is why we also see her that she's the dispeller of the darkness. But even though she's the dispeller of the darkness, we can actually see people born under this Tithi who are fascinated with darkness. People fascinated with dark magic also. We can really see people like that. Obviously, for something like that to happen, Saturn himself needs to be a very specific placement, Moon needs to be in very specific placement. But it's just important to know that yes, this fascination with the darker part of life can happen. Fascination with death as well. Fascination with time. Fascination with things, with trying to go and push things beyond the limits. Like one example that I am almost always bringing with Shivaduti and Saptami Tithi, which is like the most extreme example of that influence, is actually Marina Abramovic. I don't know if any of you know her, but she's a very famous performer who goes really way beyond the normal boundaries, actually. So it's a very, very interesting case. And these people also can go beyond any boundaries. And this is very interesting because Saturn himself, on one hand, it's true, he represents the limitation, but he also represents this strong drive, you know, within those natives to test the limitations, their own limits, like how far they can go, what is possible, how far they can go beyond their fears also. So they can be extremely courageous also due to that. They can have a little bit of this peaceful warriors sort of nature, and they want to test themselves very often. They're not afraid of that. They can really have this tremendous courage very often, but very peaceful courage, you know, not this sort of Martian fiery courage, but more the courage to experience many different things in life. They're also not afraid of hard work. If they have like any goal, they are really not afraid of doing anything, you know, just to receive that. And because goddess Shivaduti, her name also means the messenger of Shiva, these people can be great mediators, actually, great lawyers also, people who are actually good in bringing people back together and being great messengers also. So for example, we can see also a couple of famous spiritual masters with that. People who are literally the messengers of God, actually. So this is also very visible sometimes. And usually spiritual masters who are born on Saptami Tithi are enormously humble as well. They have this very deep and very great humility, which is actually the most common trait of a true master. So goddess Shivaduti, she has several things in her arms. It's very interesting that Tantra Raja describes her being bright like midday sun. When the sun is in midday, it's the most powerful, right? When the sun is in the midday, it's in the 10th house. And original 10th house is surprisingly also, again, the sign of Capricorn, sign of Saturn. So again, is this interesting connection between Saturn and Sun present here. And due to, you know, when we are thinking what is midday sun, why it's associated with the 10th house, because it's when we are at our peak activity. And also when we are at our peak activity and midday summer sun is actually extremely heating. So we are also sweating, we are perspirating because due to the amount of work which comes from that house, from that placement. So also people definitely born on that day need to kind of really take care that they don't take too much on themselves because they can burn themselves out very quickly too. And in her right hands, goddess Shivaduti, it's not written correctly. It's written here that she has 4 hands. She has 8 hands, as we can see. So that's a mistake here. So she has 8 hands, and in her right hand she has Ankusha. So we said about Ankusha many times already, that this is this tool for speeding up the elephant and controlling the instinct of repulsion. She has also a sword. Sword usually shows actually the ability to cut for the truth, to cut something, to divide something, and it's the power of discrimination. And these people really love the truth. It's actually very hard for them to not be truthful, and not even it's about the truth, it's also about some sort of transparency. They actually like that. They like when everything is transparent, everything is clear, everything is truthful. And when the situation in which they are in is not like that, they feel very disturbed too. Also, X is in one of her hands, and a lotus flower. So she has mainly just the weapons, and we are seeing here also a lotus flower, which symbolizes a sort of purity. But also, if we think about it, it's so beautiful that actually one of Saturn's nakshatras, Anuradha, also has lotus flower as a symbol, which symbolizes this ability to grow above the dirt of the world, above the mud of the world, and blossom as the most beautiful flower. And it's actually very similarly like that in the life of these people. Usually their life in the beginning might not be so great, or might be actually more, how to say, oriented towards material life, towards material world. But then after some time, they usually actually get dissatisfied with that, and they are trying to seek for something higher. And now whether this something higher will be spirituality, or whether they will turn more into, let's say, darker part of spirituality, that's the question. But these are usually the people that have this mind which likes to inquire for the truth, which likes to see the truth of the world. And in her left hand, Goddess Shivaduti is holding Pasha, again, so a noose for controlling the passions, shield for protection. So just by that, we can also see that they're also fairly protective people about their emotions. And that is actually very true. These people don't show their emotions that easily. And there's some quite interesting quality in those people, at least those Saptami natives whom I personally know, that very often they are kind of, because it's again Bhadra Tithi, so it's the Tithi of the earth element. And it's also Saturn here. So they might be very often very focused just on the surface of things in a way, because everything is so transparent in them. They want to be so transparent and open about everything that sometimes when it comes to actually going deeper within themselves and understanding themselves better, they might find trouble with that, actually, to actually really dive deeper into their emotions and understand that. So sometimes they can be like too much on the surface, you could say, due to that, or they might be very protective about their emotions, or might just experience some sort of disconnection on the level of emotions themselves. So this can happen definitely. But also what is fascinating, if you can see that there are mostly weapons in the hands of this goddess, that very often actually these people have quite loud manner of speaking, not often, not always, but we can definitely see that, and very direct manner of speech. So this is very, very specific manner of speech, which can be very good because you always know that they are saying what they really mean to say. So that's what makes it easier in communication with them. However, what is kind of tricky here, that due to their great openness, sometimes actually they say things, like they say just wrong thing in the wrong place. They have good intentions, but because they are a little bit too direct and a little bit too much, oriented on the truth, it's extremely hard for them to actually sugarcoat something, or just even put some more factor of kindness into that. And due to that, they are so often misunderstood, even if they don't actually mean anything bad. So that's actually very, very interesting. And she also holds a mace. And mace actually is, especially the mace in the hands of Vishnu, is considered to be the symbol of control over the ego. So this is why these people are quite humble too. And cup made of gems. So it also shows that these people actually have quite an interesting capacity to actually attract wealth. This is very true about them. And it's very interesting that this goddess is also called, commander of Shiva's army. And if we think about the previous goddess, Vajreshwari, who was all about sacrifice, and she was said to actually dwell in the ocean of blood, and here we have goddess Shivaduti, who is commander of Shiva's army. They definitely have kind of similar quality here. And it's quite fascinating to observe that actually Adolf Hitler was born exactly on the border between Shashti and Saptami. So he had the nature of both goddesses, of being the actual commander of some exact actual army, but also the sacrifice element, the blood sacrifice element was there from Shashti Tithi. So also anybody who, because I know that many people have this question, because many people are born on exact border of two Tithis. And what does it mean? Usually it means that the person will have the traits of both the Tithis actually, more or less. But it also shows that emotionally it's actually not easy placement, because then the Tithi Rashi itself will fall right in Gandanta, which is not an easy place for it to be in. This is why it's always said that it's best to avoid any sandhis, any junction points in Jyotisha, be it the junction point between zodiac signs, Gandantas, and also between the Tithis. So the qualities here, a little bit more qualities of Saptami Tithi. Kala here is Dhairya, which is literally courage. This is why people here born on this lunar day are very courageous. Element is earth, and guna is tamas. Tamas is connected with physical reality, so we can understand by that that these are actually extremely grounded people and very practical, even very technical. So what I personally noticed with many of these people, that sometimes they might even have trouble with understanding a metaphor, actually, because they're so practical and so to the point. So especially if a man is born on this Tithi, very often you can see that the person might have this problem with comprehending the metaphor or poetry or things like that, because they are just very, very much to the point. Direction is northwest here, planetary ruler Saturn. Stage of consciousness is deep sleep and dreaming. So it's a very, let's say, stagnant state of consciousness, but still there is some creative aspect due to dreaming here. And divine quality is actually tapasya. So it's the power to do penance, the power to sacrifice something. And they also have this quality, usually, to actually sacrifice for something higher. And obviously, actually, two opposite traits may manifest here, either person being complete workaholic, or actually some sort of laziness can be seen here too, because Saturn is the ruler. So usually these natives, like when they work like 100%, but when they rest, they also rest 100%. So they have this ability to actually really just rest and do completely nothing. And it's also birthday of Suryadev, like we said. And from now on, from Saptami Tithi, actually starts the group of Tithis who are at the same time birthdays of certain planets. So Saptami Tithi is the birthday of Sun God as well. And due to the fact that certain planets are having birthdays on certain Tithis, other planets will become unfriendly towards that Tithi and in that charts. So for example, for Saptami natives, as we can see here, Rahu becomes unfriendly because Rahu is unfriendly towards the Sun. So Rahu becomes unfriendly towards all Saptami natives. And this is actually additional reason why sometimes we can see people actually interested in some sort of dark magic, especially if you see in Saptami natives chart, for example, Saturn and Rahu coming together. That's a very powerful indication for something like that. Or even sometimes Rahu and Moon for Saptami natives charts. So these are like certain things which is very important to see, because even if we sometimes see in Saptami natives chart Rahu, which is very nicely placed, who is alone, maybe even exalted, and we would say, oh, that's so great. But actually, for Saptami natives, it's not too good to have too powerful Rahu, because he's by default unfriendly towards them. And the form of Shiva here is Chandrasekhara. So Chandrasekhara literally means the one who put the moon on his head, and the one who actually controls the moon, so the one who controls the mind. And I think it's actually very beautiful for those natives, because really, if we think about all the planets, actually Saturn is the planet who controls the moon the greatest, right? Because this is why we say that we have Shani Sadasati, which everybody is afraid of, because then Saturn finally comes and controls this moon, this monkey mind, which always dreams about something and just brings it down, brings some grounding and a practical approach to that moon. Which is why for the person who has, let's say, too big distortion between seeing the reality and actually between what is in the person's mind and what is the reality, then Shani Sadasati, it's true, won't be very pleasant. But if a person is already quite grounded and accepting the truth, then Shani Sadasati can be a great time period for the person, which is something definitely, I believe, very important to stress over and over again, so people don't get too scared of Shani Sadasati. And even here, Shiva is in the form of controller of the mind, controller of the moon. And very often these people actually have great self-control. They are really capable of controlling themselves, again, for some higher purpose. They're even able sometimes to endure great pain, you know, even physical pain, and still stay completely sane and normal. They have this capacity. Like again, Marina Abramovic is a great example here, right? She could inflict any pain on herself and just endure that. So that's a really, really interesting quality with that placement. And nakshatras which resemble kind of similar qualities to Saptami Tithi, so the nakshatras which have same guna and same tattva would be Anuradha and Dhanishta, which is interesting because Anuradha is also the nakshatra of Saturn. And Dhanishta, even though it is a nakshatra of Mars, but it is exactly between two signs of Saturn, so Capricorn and Aquarius. So Anuradha is Saturn's nakshatra in the sign of Mars, while Dhanishta is Mars's nakshatra in the sign of Saturn. So we see this sort of soldier-like mentality here very clearly. And by the number of hands, actually, Shivaduti goddess, she has 8 hands, and they are representing 4 padas of Magha nakshatra and 4 padas of Purva Falguni, which I also find interesting, not only because of Magha and the ancestors who are so connected, obviously, to Saturn, but also Magha and Purva Falguni, both of them have as their yoni, or as their animal, a rat. And the rat is actually a very, very social animal. And also people who are born Saptami Tithi, even though they have, you know, this very strict nature, they're actually very social people usually. They really enjoy being in the company of other people, and they need company of other people to grow. Because it's also 7th Tithi, so again, it must to a certain extent resemble the qualities of moon also in the 7th house, and generally the qualities of 7th house. So very, very social people, but can be very secretive too, similarly like the rats. And by the vowel, but because vowel here is rim, so this is like one of the 4 semi-vowels we could say in Sanskrit, because they are not actual vowels. I mean, they don't sound like vowels. So it's very interesting that they start with Saptami, which is also this more strict sort of Tithi. And this same vowel is also prescribed to Rohini nakshatra. So definitely there is also very often some sort of feminine aspect to that nakshatra too. And this can be actually very clearly seen sometimes, especially when moon is very nicely placed for the person. But also Rohini nakshatra is strongly connected with how we actually deal with our habits in life in general. All sorts of cycles, all sorts of habits in our life, like how we are dealing with our habits, literally. And Saptami Tithi is also very much about that. And very often whenever moon is back again in the phase of Saptami Tithi, it's very important, you know, for all of us to kind of reflect like what sort of habits we could potentially change. And sometimes for those natives, it might be actually a little bit hard to change their habits because Saturn is fairly stubborn planet. So they can be very stubborn about their habits and form very strong and powerful habits sometimes. And even to the extent that you can also see that this Tithi will have certain tendencies towards the addictions. However, Saptami is very special because person who experiences the addictions and is born under Saptami Tithi usually has also enough willpower to go out of the addiction. So both things can be visible here. And just to come really quickly to Magha Nakshatra, this is very interesting connection here because very often we can see also the natives very fascinated with death here. In fact, we can really see people who are having some work related to death. And this I have seen really, either people who are literally working in mortuaries, cemeteries, things like that, or are just fascinated with this, you know, different sort of rituals associated with death and so on. Just fascinated with the passage of time, really, which is very much like motive of Saturn, I believe. And that is the yantra also of goddess Shivaduti. So again, we are seeing the same figure, Ashtakona figure. This is actually one of the versions of this yantra because there are 2 versions of it. And this Ashtakona figure again shows that these people usually like the rules when things are in order as well. So that's a very strong indication for them. And they don't like, you know, to go out of their rules and out of their order very often. And this is how the moon looks like during Shukla Saptami and Krishna Saptami. So you can see it's extremely similar because it's already Ashtami Tithi, so it's already just half. So also there is quite a lot of light present here during both phases of the moon. So I think that's all from my side, Dr. Kaiji.
Astrology, I think some fantastic points which have come out. And one of the observations that you also mentioned and which I see is, the connection with the sun, for this Tithi. When you look at Muhurta Chintamani, a classic in timing of events, and then Purva Kalamrita, these two classics do mention sun god being the lord of this Tithi. And in Brahad Samhita, Varamihira says it is Indra. So that is a very interesting combination that, we see that he mentions about Indra. So what is very surprising is, as you mentioned, this is the birth Tithi of Surya, and the planetary ruler is Saturn. Okay, and surprisingly, whenever you see even the nakshatra, sun god is apparently born in Anuradha nakshatra, as per many. Some say Vishaka, some say Anuradha. There's always a debate, but it's surprising that sun finds its strength in the Tithis ruled by Saturn and in the nakshatra ruled by Saturn.
Yes.
So that's a interesting correlation that I'm seeing from this Tithi. But I think you have mentioned all the great points and good observations that you're talking about. These people also wanting to create some element of wealth as well, because of the connection with uh, the pot with wealth or the bowl of wealth that she is carrying. So it could also mean that, these people might be original torch bearers of knowledge, because they go very deep to find, and because of the sun connection here, I'm thinking that maybe because sun has got its own light, it doesn't reflect anybody's light, it's original light. So these people might form to, might give you a feeling that they are quite original in many of the things that they do.
Yes.
So that's a very interesting point. And then you mentioned about its connection with Anuradha and Dhanishta. Okay, so that again brought me to the point of, Dhanishta is said to be the birth, or rather Shravana and Dhanishta, both of them are said to be birth star of Mercury. And Magha is said to be birth star of Venus. And that's why you said, these people might be interested in something to do with death. And,
Yes.
Guru Shukracharya of Venus was very much interested in Mrit Sanjeevani.
Yeah.
These are the people who might be interested in also knowing about life after death and what happens, astral travels, or all that Magha qualities might be very much ingrained. And Puru Falguni is said to be the birth star. I mean, many texts, that might be different variations because many people say, okay, it's another birth star or whatever. But what I have heard from the book by Pandit Sanjay Rath, Brahat Nakshatra. He mentions in his book that Jupiter is supposed to be
Yes.
born in Purva Falguni Nakshatra or Uttara
Yes.
Falguni, one of them. So the Falguna, in fact. So that's a very interesting, thoughts that are coming from just observing what happens in this Tithi. So, but I'm grateful that there are some fascinating points which have come with Shiva Duti and being the warrior, with all the energies that I see as also the energies of a warrior, because she was leading the
Yes.
forces of Shiva. And interestingly, all the correlations that you mentioned, because Anuradha is falling in Scorpio, which is again the Rashi ruled by Mars, and the nakshatra Anuradha is Saturn, in the Vimshotri Dasha system. And when you go to Dhanishta, it's the other way around, It's the
Yeah.
nakshatra of Mars and sitting very much in Saturn's zodiac sign. So
It's
there's a
actually
very
all. Yes.
So you see that Saturn and Mars connection, the warrior as well as the restrainer sort of a thing. That might be something which might be there in this Tithi.
Yeah, and
But
also the sun, which is very interesting because even if he look like Mula Trikona of Saturn is exactly opposite the Mula Trikona of the sun, and they actually become really important during the Tithis, the Mula Trikonas themselves, because Mula Trikona of the ruling planet of the Tithi becomes, we are usually like telling it's like Tithipati Kshetra, so the Kshetra, the field of the Lord of the Tithi. And the sign which is right opposite to it becomes Tithipati Kshetra Paksha, and that's like kind of the destiny of the Tithi, where it looks towards. And for these natives, it becomes like for Saptami natives, like very, very powerful and special because of this Saturn and Sun connection is getting like very, very strengthened. And this is why very often they kind of need to balance this Sun and Saturn. Because what I noticed that they really have sometimes this issue with balancing Sun and Saturn, like with balancing me and the others, right? And finding balance between them, not to getting too lost in the relationships, but also not to losing oneself completely, but also not to going to another extreme and getting too lost just in oneself and completely forgetting about the others, because the other extreme can happen as well. So that's a very, very interesting balance that needs to be found here with this lunar day.
and it's surprising that in Libra is where the sun seems to get debilitated. Where and in the same apparently the same nakshatra, Saturn gets exalted and Sun gets debilitated at 10 degrees of Libra, which is Swati nakshatra.
Yes.
Just fascinating, anyway. But thank you very much, Ashalaji. This was a brilliant discussion that we have had, and we'll join again for the next Tithi, which is Ashtamas Tithi. But thank you very much for this brilliant discussion. Namaste.
Thank you so much. Goodbye, Ji. Namaste.